Deep in the shadowy forests of the Pacific Northwest, along a cold and winding river, a predator stalks his prey. One victim, then another, and another. He can't stop. He's not just a killer. He's one of the deadliest serial killers in the world. And in a region that's already infamous as a hunting ground for the predators, his body count stands apart from the rest. At least 49 lives claimed so far. Thanks for being with us. I'm Jen.
Hi, I'm Tina.
This week, we are talking about a very creepy show. It is Catching Killers, Season 1, Episode 1, called Body Count, The Green River Killer. As Tina likes to say,
Green River Killer.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, short story on why I said that. I first heard about this story from the Australian true crime podcast I listen to. Shout out to them. Not Another Crime Podcast. They're great. And I just love them so much because
they're really kind people. We have randomly emailed back and forth with them, and they are so kind.
They're great. And I love that they tell stories about crimes and crazy things that happened over in that part of the world, in Australia, New Zealand, even England, and also America, because they talk about the Green River Killer. Anyway.
Oh my gosh. That's the first time you ever heard of the Green River Killer?
Yes. And when I heard them say it, I went around my house for the entire week saying, Green River Killer.
You would.
I just love their accent so much. Okay, I'll stop.
All right. So like I said, major listener warning on this show. Before we get into it, I also want to say thank you to everybody who's donated to our podcast this week. We are on buymeacoffee.com/2crimenewsies, and we've had quite a bit of support from folks who are helping fuel our podcast. And if you would like to enjoy a cup with us, you can make a donation of any amount to our podcast fund, which fuels us by buying us coffee, basically.
Sure does, and I'm drinking some right now.
You are. So, major listener warning. This is a case that remained unsolved for many decades, and it's a creepy one. It's a scary one. It's a tough one to talk about because of some of the things that happened. Should we jump right into it?
Let's do it.
All right. So, the show opens with it. By the way, I don't think we actually said the name of the podcast. I said, hi, everyone. I'm Jen. You're listening to Two Crime Newsies, just so you're aware.
Did you say the name of this episode too?
Yeah.
Okay. That I did. In another world.
That I did, but I didn't actually say what podcast this is. I mean, I feel like our listeners know, but yeah.
You're listening to Two Crime Newsies.
And she says it in a slightly Australian accent. Okay, so let's jump into the episode. Now, the show opens with a chaotic, almost newsroom-looking setting. There's phones ringing, crumpled up paper on the floor, typing quickly on keyboards. It's controlled chaos, which is something that I love about a newsroom.
We see a graphic that says Seattle, Washington, 1988. Jen calls a newsroom controlled chaos. I just call it chaos. Imagine having to write a story with phones ringing, people having conversations all around you, the distraction of reporters, photographers in and out the door, the beep of radios going back and forth, the constant noise of the police scanner.
I love it. It was controlled chaos, in my opinion.
How the heck did we write in that environment? I do writing, mostly editing now, and when I do, I have to be tucked away in my little corner of the house where I have a desk with very little noise, very little distraction. Anyway, I did think we were in a newsroom at first when I saw this scene, but we find out it's somewhere much more exciting, I think.
Well, turns out it's a popular set of a show called Manhunt. And I describe it best to our listeners as a version of America's Most Wanted, which was a popular show that used to air every Saturday night in the 80s and 90s, where America would be introduced to the most wanted fugitives around.
Oh, you remember something from the 80s. Look at you.
I was going to say 80s and 90s.
Did you know America's Most Wanted is still running?
Really?
Uh-huh.
Huh.
I had no idea. I looked it up because I was curious, and it sure is.
Huh. Interesting. Well, then on the screen, we see a very young detective named Dave Reichert with the...
Wait, I'm sorry, Dave what?
Reichert. So it's German. Okay, Dave Reichert. I'll say
Thank
Reichert.
you.
Okay.
I'm not going to be able to mimic that.
Well, then on the screen, we see a very young detective named David Reichert with the King County Sheriff's Department sitting amongst this chaos. And he's wearing a button-down shirt with a tie. He's got a brown, bushy mustache, and not a single hair is out of place. Did you notice that?
I did not.
Seriously, like no flyaways, no nothing. I need to know this man's secret.
What hairspray does he use?
Fact. Dave has this serious look on his face because tonight the manhunt is on for the man known as the Green River Killer.
The Manhunt show host asks Detective Reichert if he has anything to say to the killer if he's watching. And the detective looks into the camera and says he's been working the case for 6 years now. And then he says to the killer, I feel very confident someone will lead us to you. This nightmare will not end. It still haunts you during every waking hour. If you have the guts and the courage, call me. It's time for us to talk.
Wow.
Jen, what if it was your job to find a serial killer and part of your job was to ask him to call you? Would you do it?
I sure would. How cool is that? Like you're looking in that camera. I'm talking to you, not you because you're not a killer.
Right.
But you know what I mean? Like I am coming through that TV. I'm coming at you, buddy.
I just think that has to take some major guts to do that.
We then flash forward to present day. Detective Dave Reichert, who was the former lead detective on the Green River case in King County, Washington. Now, he sits in front of the interview camera wearing jeans and a super tight polo shirt. I mean, it looks like his biceps are going to rip the shirt apart. I was like, how does this dude fit into the shirt?
Oh my gosh.
And his graying hair is combed very neatly to the side. Again, not a hair out of place, and he's got a super stern look on his face. And now he's the type of person who looks like he's a super nice guy to be around if you're on his good side. But he does not look like the type you want to piss off, in my opinion.
I did not notice his biceps or his tight shirt. You are hilarious. The things that catch your attention. I would just love to study your brain.
Before I get into my next spiel, I'm just going to say I'm not the only person that noticed this.
Oh, yeah?
Because I was talking to another friend a while back about this very episode, and she was like, did you see he barely fit? She called it a Gap size small t-shirt.
Seriously?
So maybe I am not the strange one. You are the strange one for not noticing that.
A baby Gap size small t-shirt? No. There's no way.
Okay.
Detective Reichert says his wife encouraged him to become a police officer. He began his career in 1972, and in 1979, he started working in the homicide and robbery unit, which was one of his career goals.
So King County is the county that Seattle sits in. Now, Seattle, Washington in the 1980s was a great place to be. And according to the Seattle Weekly, Seattle was booming in the 80s. What would later become Microsoft was founded, and the grunge scene was all the rage for young people. It was a happening place to be. And during this time, Dave Reichard started working a series of homicides around the city. On August 15th, 1982, police got a call about 2 bodies in the Green River. This section of the Green River is outside of town. When police arrived, they had to make their way down a super steep embankment to the river, which had lots of trees, bushes, and tall grass around it. And we see video of this on the show. And we also see illustrations of how the bodies were found in the river. And it looks like both bodies had been pushed under the water and then had rocks of varying sizes put on top of them to weigh them down. We also learned that from the notes that the water temperature of the Green River at the time was 64 degrees. Victim number 1 was laying face down in the water, and she was facing north in about 8 to 12 inches of water. And one of the rocks near her ankle was about halfway above the water. Now, victim number 2 also had her head facing north, but was laying face up, and she was about 2 to 3 feet in the water. We hear from Detective Dave Reichard, who says while he was working the bodies, he found a 3rd body in the water. And what makes this even more shocking is that police were familiar with this scene because they had found another 2 bodies in the river within the last month down the river from where they had just found these 3 new bodies.
Detective Reichard says he remembers the shock of that day and the tension among everyone at the scene as this terrible realization hits. There have now been 5 women found dead in the Green River.
Detective Reichard says all the girls have been strangled and then dumped. And he knew they've got a serial killer on their hands who will not stop until he's caught.
Detective Reichard remembers returning home late on the day they found the 3 women in the river. He talks about how he would often shield his wife and his family from the terrible things he saw while working. He tells us that this was his first time working a serial murder case. We also find out detectives are now searching the river, combing the banks, the whole area, looking for clues to point them to the killer.
At this point, a Green River task force was formed, and Detective Reichard took over the reins of being in charge of catching this monster. 25 detectives were brought together, and we learned that one of them was a woman named Detective Faye Brooke.
Detective Brooke has an incredible backstory.
She really does.
She tells the camera she had been working in the sex crimes unit for 4 years. She also tells us for major cases like this one, it was common for the sex crimes detectives to help the homicide detectives. Then we hear more about Detective Brooke's story. She tells the camera that she is a survivor of sex abuse. She goes on to say that her work as a sex crime detective was like therapy for her because she was able to find, arrest, and stop people who were committing those types of crimes.
According to the autopsy, a man's bodily fluid was found on 2 of the victims, indicating that there had been sexual contact with the killer before their deaths. And I'm not going to say what it is because yuck, we don't need to go into it. I'm sure you can imagine what it was. And at this point, I also am like, good, they have this man's DNA, his bodily fluids, like that's a forensic lead. It's real evidence because up until now, police didn't have anything. They didn't really have any evidence since the bodies of these women have been found in water, and water destroys or washes away evidence. So you're probably thinking, okay, run the DNA. He's probably in the system. It's over with, it's done with. But it's not like you see on those crime scene shows that we all watch now. Back then, DNA wasn't really a thing like it is today.
They have DNA evidence, but they don't have the means to create a DNA profile, which is what would happen today.
So police start looking into the victims. Through dental records, missing persons information, and fingerprints, investigators discovered the victims had fallen on hard times and had been working as prostitutes in and around Seattle. And this is when Detective Faye Brooke recognized one of the victims.
Detective Brooke says she met Marcia on another case when Marcia reported being assaulted to the police.
Now at this point, Marcia Chapman was 31 years old at this time. She was a mom of 3, and she was working as a prostitute to make money to take care of her kids. And most of the victims also worked in a certain area in Seattle known as the Strip, which is a highway that runs between Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. So that highway became the focal point in hunting this killer and for Detective Faye Brooke.
Detective Brooke's job now was to go to the Strip, which was known as an area to pick up prostitutes, and talk to women working there and see if she can get any information that could lead her to the killer. And Detective Brooke says most of the women who were street workers were young, in their teens to early 20s, all trying to make money and survive. And while she's talking to these women to try to get any information, she's also warning them that there's someone out there killing women like them.
We hear that residents of Seattle and the surrounding areas were scared, rightfully so. There was someone out there hunting women. The tips started coming in, but nothing really panned out. And at this point, the FBI told the King County Sheriff that they believe this killer was arrogant enough that he may call the police himself with possible tips, which led them away from him and towards someone else. Now, I've said it countless times on our podcast, it's just something that I don't understand. If you're out there killing people, why call the police? It would make sense to try to stay away from the police as much as you possibly can. I mean, I'm no killer, I'm no serial killer, but to me, it makes zero sense to call them.
But we've also heard from many detectives on shows like these that serial killers seek attention. They want to be known, even if it means be known as a weasel.
I mean, we did an episode a couple episodes back about BTK where he was just constantly in communication with police. He just wanted his name in the press. It's crazy.
Which is exactly how he got caught.
Rightfully so.
Works for me.
It's 1983, and it's been a year since investigators found the first body in the Green River case. An elderly man at this point is picking apples in a field near the Green River, and he ended up finding bones scattered around the field. And it wasn't just one body which was recovered that day. Turns out the bones belonged to 3 different victims.
You said picking apples.
I did.
By the river.
Yeah, idyllic.
Yes, this makes me really angry because the Green River in pictures and in the video that we see in this show looks like such a lovely place. It's near Seattle. We see pictures of these huge green trees, the flowing river with white rapids, mountains in the background, and apples. I'm assuming like an orchard. It sounds beautiful, but now the Green River is forever associated with death and grief, and it makes me so mad that this monster weasel did this.
A short time later, police were called out to another scene where they found another body, and then another, and another. The bodies just kept turning up. And at this point, the Green River Task Force had over 13 bodies in the span of a year and a half that were linked to the killer. And with no promising leads, more police officers were brought in to help out the task force.
15 more officers and 10 more detectives joined the task force.
Now, one of those detectives was Detective Tom Jensen. And let me just say, of all the detectives we met, Detective Jensen looks like the kind of guy that would blend in at an elementary school PTA meeting. Right?
Your descriptions
in the
are
show,
pretty spot on.
In the show, we see him casually sitting in his seat and he's smiling as he's being introduced, wearing these like thin framed glasses. He's got a tie on and a blue button down shirt. And to say he just looks like an all around good dad, if you ask me. And I also think he looks like a super organized guy, something that could come in handy for this task force. Did you catch when he mumbles lights, camera, action right as he sits down? Did you catch that?
Yes, I did.
And it made me be like, I don't think this guy likes the spotlight. Now, Detective Jensen says when he got out of the Navy, he returned to Seattle and was looking for a new career, and that's how he got started on all of this.
We learned that Detective Jensen is known for having a great memory and thorough detective work. He was working burglary cases for 6 years and was excited to join the Green River Task Force to work on a different kind of case.
We hear from Detective Faye Brooke, who says the fear is real in the city of Seattle at this point, and each day the news media wants updates. We see a clip where she's being interviewed by a reporter who asks her if she believes the killer will strike again, to which she responds that in a serial investigation, the killer continues until he's caught. Can you imagine? Like, this statement would ignite fear, and for many women, anger throughout the city of Seattle.
We see video of protesters in Seattle, and we learn it's a group of women's rights organizations and prostitutes who are protesting the investigation, saying that because the victims are prostitutes, the search for the killer wasn't a priority. And Detective Brooks says that hurt to hear. She says everyone involved was committed to finding the killer.
Detective Reichert says that everyone was upset, including the investigators working the case, because even though the public thought they were, the police were not placing labels on these women. They saw them as what they were. They were daughters. They were mothers. These women were granddaughters, and they were sisters. They were all human beings. Detective Reichert says this while fighting to hold back tears. When your job is to collect human remains, you can't help but place such a high value on every life. And you could see the anguish on his face and hear his voice breaking. It broke my heart because you could truly see how much all these investigators cared. And unfortunately, the public never really gets to see what life is like for these police officers, or these crime scene investigators, or these people who deal with death day in and day out. Yes, it's their job and they choose to do this job, but it takes a toll on them, just like it would take a toll on anyone. And when they leave the scene of a horrific murder or see a child that's been severely hurt, it stays with you, and it stays with you for a long time. I personally will never forget working at the TV station, and there was a house fire, and a little kid died in this house fire. And I'm not going to go into the details, but the child was in a wheelchair and couldn't get out. And the parents managed to get out, but the little kid couldn't. And to this day, it stays with me. There's some sounds that you never forget. There's some smells you don't ever forget. I remember for a while after this happened, on my way home from work, I would drive by where that house once stood and just slowly drive by and turn my head and look and remember. Those things stay with you. The smell, the sounds, all of it just stays with you. And for these investigators, it's their job, but it's also a part of their lives because things like this don't have an on and off switch. Every life is important, and it doesn't matter who they were or what they did. Every life on this planet matters. And I went off on a ramble. I'm sorry about that, but I think it needed to be said because I feel like a lot of people forget that.
Yeah, and I do admire detectives for what they do. When you're working on a case like this, every day of your life is focused on such horror. Mm-hmm. And to do that kind of work and then go home with your family and to try to put on a happy face for them and not let it affect you or them, that has to be so difficult. And then also while you're with your family, remembering the families like you remember of the victims who are grieving, and also counting on you to help solve, their issue or their crime or what's going on.
This takes us to March 21st of 1984. When we hear from Detective Tom Jensen, the sweet-looking PTA dad that we talked about, that investigators got a call from the manager of a city baseball field reporting that his dog had come home carrying what looked to be a human bone.
I would be horrified. My dog has found a bone in a field before.
No.
Mm-hmm. It turned out to be a small animal bone. He swallowed it whole.
Holy moly. And you don't have a big dog.
No, he's a small dog.
Or actually, to our listeners, Tina has a massive, very angry dog.
Oh, yeah, real mean dog. Real mean dog. Anyway, he swallowed the bone whole. It was, I believe it was a foot, like maybe a raccoon foot or a possum foot.
Oh, my goodness.
We rush him to the vet, and they do an x-ray of his belly, and there's the foot.
No.
I'm not even joking. Like, you could see it. It was like full intact in his belly.
Oh.
And they told us, okay, monitor him and bring him back tomorrow and we'll take another look, see what it looks like tomorrow.
If we've had movement.
Right. So he's fine. He acts normal the whole rest of the day. The next day, we take him to the vet, do another x-ray, and it's gone. It's just gone. I don't know if his body broke it down or what happened, but he was fine.
Good.
But crazy.
Yeah. Could you imagine being like out and about and your dog is running around and comes back to you carrying a bone?
No.
And I mean, there's a difference. You can tell a little animal bone from like a human. I don't know what this bone was, a human leg or whatever. Like you can tell there's a difference.
Any human bone has to be a substantially sized bone.
Compared to a raccoon, yeah.
Right. And we learned that this area where this animal found the bone is located near Star Lake, which isn't too far from the Green River.
We hear that the manager of the field, I would say it looks like a city rec league baseball field is kind of what I'm thinking this is in the show.
Yeah.
The manager pointed out to police which direction the dog had come from. So police started walking that way. And a short ways off, in some woods, police found the bones of a woman lying in a fetal position, kind of like she was holding her body and her legs were tucked up against her chest in a creek type area. Now, this woman turned out to be between 12 and 18 years old.
At the time, that is the age that they're estimating. And Detective Jensen is back at this scene in present day, and he's remembering all of this while telling us the story. And he's telling us about this victim, and he says when they found her, all that was left was skeletal remains. And he says this was his first homicide crime scene. We see him having a very difficult time holding it together while he's talking about finding this body, and then not only finding it, but having to retrieve the bones himself. And clearly this moment in time affected him deeply.
We hear that this woman was identified as Bones 10, meaning that she was the 10th victim who police thought was linked to the Green River Killer. And the following day, investigators are back in the area, and a bloodhound, it's a type of dog, located another body near the baseball field. That victim was identified by her dental records and was also a known prostitute, which led police to believe she too was a victim of the Green River Killer. The search of the area continued, and body after body was uncovered. We hear that in a span of a year and a half, the Green River Killer killed at least 20 women, and police at this point had nothing to go on.
For the entirety of 1984, that was before Jen's time,
Sure was.
detectives were consumed with investigating these deaths. 20 murders in 21 months. At this time, the Green River Killer is considered to be one of the worst serial killers in the United States. And pressure is mounting for detectives to catch the killer.
Well, if you think about it, 20 murders in 21 months, who knows how many others were out there? These were just ones they found.
Right.
And in 1984, we hear that the task force took part in that show called Someone Knows Something. And the hope was that someone watching the show would know the person who was responsible for all these deaths and call in with a tip. And during the show, a reward of $100,000 was announced in hopes that the amount of cash would lead to some kind of clues. Now, the question was, would it work?
Well, it sure did light up the phone lines. Detective Brooks says they got an overwhelming amount of tips after announcing the reward. Thousands of calls were coming in.
And that's when a young girl named Rebecca came into the task force office and said she may, in fact, have a clue to who the killer may be. Rebecca told investigators that 2 years earlier, in 1982, she was picked up by a man who solicited her for sex. We hear the man showed Rebecca an ID from his job at a place called Kenworth Trucking. And Rebecca ended up telling police that she got into his truck and they drove to a secluded wooded area. Rebecca told investigators the man started getting violent with her during a sexual act and that he started to choke her. And we hear that Rebecca managed to fight back and she ran away. And at this point, Rebecca didn't know it, but a small tip she gave police would eventually lead them to the Green River Killer.
While Rebecca is there, police start looking into the records of the men that had been arrested for picking up prostitutes, which I just think is brilliant. And wouldn't you know it, Jen, they found one guy amongst all of these people who listed his employer as Kenworth Trucking.
At this point, detectives showed Rebecca a photo lineup, and in that lineup, a picture of Gary Ridgway was included. Detective Reichard says Rebecca looked at the 6 pictures and pointed to Gary Ridgway and told investigators, "That's the guy who tried to kill me." Now let's talk about this scumbag, Gary Ridgway. He's 35 years old at this point and worked at Kenworth Trucking, as Tina had mentioned. He had been married and had a son. He had been arrested in the early 1980s for trying to pick up a prostitute. We hear after he was arrested in 1982, he was interviewed by police where he said some very disturbing things.
Detective Reichard plays a recording of the interview for the camera, and we hear someone questioning him, saying, "Were you driving on Pacific Highway? Did you pick up a young lady?" We hear Ridgway respond, "Yes, I did." The officer goes on to ask, "What happens when you got to the area of 22nd South and South 24th? Ridgway says, "She bit me and I choked her." This next part is chilling. Detective Reichard points out that Ridgway's demeanor, his voice, and the way he's responding to questions is calm and very matter of fact.
He sits there like, nah, no biggie.
And the officer then asks, "How long did you choke her?" Ridgway says, 10 or 15 seconds or so. In a very whatever attitude. Kind of like if someone asked you, Jen, "How long did you warm up that muffin in the microwave?" 10 or 15 seconds or so.
Needless to say, police now had Ridgway in their crosshairs, so they start to dig into his history. Turns out the 1982 arrest wasn't his only run-in with police. In 1983, the Seattle Port Police had done a traffic stop on Ridgway, in which he was found in the pickup with a lady named Kelly McGinnis. Kelly had been a prostitute and later ended up going missing. Now, on the screen at this point, we see a map of the Seattle area on the left side of the screen, and to the right, we see lots of pictures of women, many of which feature smiling faces, all of which are beautiful. In total, we see 27 pictures in all women of all shapes, all sizes, and all ages. At this point, police waste no time and get a search warrant for Ridgway's car and his house. They also want to get a warrant for him so they could get some bodily fluid samples from him. So detectives head to Kenworth Trucking, where Ridgway works, and picked him up, while other officers went to Ridgway's house. Detective Riker was one of the ones who went to his house, and we see pictures of it on the screen. It's a modest house, nothing fancy. There's some bushes or what looks like small trees in the front along the windows. There's a shed in the backyard. It looks like a normal house, nothing to ever indicate a crazed serial killer lives there.
I don't know, Jen. There's a couple of tarps over what looks like a camper of some sort, and tarps lying around what looks like a shed. Tarps freak me out. They remind me of Dexter. Why would you have so many tarps in your yard?
It's the Pacific Northwest. It rains a lot.
Okay, I can see that. What you're protecting? You're protecting
well,
what?
You might have some tarps over your firewood to keep it drier. I don't know. I don't live there, but maybe.
Maybe. I didn't see any firewood. Anyway, police are searching inside and outside of the home. And they are looking for anything that might be connected to one of the victims. But the search of Ridgway's home doesn't turn up any evidence that can connect him to the murders.
The other team, the one assigned to getting Ridgway's bodily fluid, we here had him chew on some medical gauze so they could collect his saliva. They were hoping that his saliva would match the blood type to some of the bodily fluids that had been left on the victims. So the crime lab ran the comparison.
But they hit another roadblock. The lab couldn't get the blood type from his saliva. So the lab freezes their saliva sample for now.
As you can imagine, this is beyond frustrating for investigators. They need that one single piece of evidence to link Ridgway to the Green River Killer. all while hoping that he doesn't strike again right under their noses. But he does. We hear that some bones were found near a construction site. Millions of dollars have been spent on the task force by this point in time, and they were trying to figure out who the killer was, to no success.
$15 million spent, with 60 detectives working on the task force. They don't have any arrests at this point. They don't have a DNA match, and they are losing time and money.
So at this point, we hear that the sheriff cut the task force. You have a killer on the loose and you cut a task force down to only one detective. It blew my mind when they said this on the show. I mean, to me, it sounds like the sheriff is saying, go ahead, keep killing. We don't think we're going to catch you, so I'm just going to stop wasting money on the case and just let you go about your business. It's crazy to me because we know he's not going to stop.
Detective Reichert describes his anchor. He talks about being at every scene of every murder, collecting the bones of these women. And he says, how can you stop investigating a case like this with so many women killed? Detective Brooke also talks about the devastation she felt about having to leave the task force. She says she knew the killer would absolutely keep going.
At this point, we hear the single investigator who's left on the case was Detective Tom Jensen.
And we see the years tick by on the screen as the show reminds us about so many events that marked this decade. 1990, Operation Desert Storm. 1993, Bill Clinton being elected president of the United States. 1995, the Oklahoma City bombing and O.J. Simpson found not guilty of murder. 1997, the death of Princess Diana.
And that takes us all the way to the end of 1997. The killer is still out there, but so is Detective Reichert, who at this point has been elected the sheriff of King County. And he's got one major thing on his mind, and that's the Green River Killer.
I have hope after seeing this. And all these years later, Detective Reichert says he couldn't stop thinking about the Green River Killer, and he never gave up hope of catching him. Detective Reichert says he's now at the helm and has the power to make decisions about the Green River Killer investigation. He calls in detectives to figure out what can they do to solve this case. And Detective Jensen tells him, science has come a long way since the late 80s. Now is the time to retest their samples.
At this point, DNA had hit a huge milestone. Just a spot of blood or someone's bodily fluid can help investigators lead to an arrest. So that old evidence from the Green River victims in 1982 was pulled out of the freezer and run. We hear that Detective Tom Jensen called a meeting with the new sheriff and with Detective Faye Brooke. Detective Brooke and Detective Tom Jensen sat down, and that's when Tom said, "We have a DNA match." Dramatically, we hear that Tom pulled a manila envelope out of his jacket pocket and handed it to Sheriff Reichert. The envelope and said, his name is in there. And before opening the envelope, the sheriff says to Tom, "It's Gary Ridgway, isn't it?" He opens the envelope and there it is. The picture of Gary Ridgway. It's over. After 2 decades of work, they know who the Green River Killer is. They finally have the evidence to go and make an arrest.
We hear news reports saying that over the 2 decades of investigating this killer, police collected over 10,000 pieces of evidence. We also see 3 of these detectives on screen, one at a time. Detective Reichert, Detective Brooke, and Detective Jensen. Each one of them full of emotion. There are tears. They have been carrying years of pain and grief and frustration, and you can actually see the relief on their faces that they must feel from solving the cases.
We then see a video clip of a perp walk of Gary Ridgway. He's wearing a white, ratty jumpsuit that's several sizes too large for him. His head is balding and he looks stoic as he hobbles along what looks to be a police station hallway. His glasses sit on his wide nose, just above his unkempt mustache. He's flanked by 2 large police officers on both sides, lumbering along like he's a toddler who has been taken to timeout. We hear that Ridgway ended up accepting a plea deal, and the deal was he tells the truth about everything, all the bodies, all the locations, and he would end up spending the rest of his life in prison and not be sentenced to death.
The hope here in this deal is that they can give answers to the families of the women who were killed and even some who may still be missing.
At this point, we see several interrogation videos of Ridgway, and they're disgusting and incredibly disturbing. In one of the videos, he said he did it because women had control of him, and he didn't like being controlled. In another video, he tells police he did it because he thought he was doing you guys, meaning the police, a favor. Killing prostitutes because the police can't control them, but he can.
In both of these videos, he seems like two different people to me, at least. In the first one, he answers like a toddler, kind of whiny. And in the second one, he's calm, showing zero emotion.
Ridgway also ended up taking police to numerous locations of where he had dumped bodies. We see video of Ridgway inside of a van where he's looking out a window, telling the driver to slow down. There's another video where he's walking next to a police officer and says, "Can we walk down there? That tree looks familiar." At this point, there was an additional 40 charges of murder filed against Ridgway. And that takes us to Ridgway's day in court. We see video of Ridgway standing amongst his defense team wearing an orange jumpsuit, and to be completely honest, it reminded me and gave me flashbacks to the Brian Kohberger sentencing, which we've done an episode on. But in Ridgway's case, the sentencing took significantly longer due to the amount of names that had to be read. The death of Marcia Chapman, to which Ridgway says guilty. For the death of Cynthia Hines, guilty. Terry Millington, guilty. Name after name after name after name. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Gary Ridgway was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of 49 women.
Detective Brooks says she still gets chills to this day when she thinks about this case. And we see footage of Detective Reichert from the trial, and he has tears running down his face. He says he remembers Ridgway walking by him and looking at him, and Detective Reichert tells him, "Gotcha, asshole."
I like it.
He says he knows it was a silly thing to say, but that it felt good to say.
I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
We hear from Detective Tom Jensen that he retired in 2012, but he couldn't stay away because there was still work to be done. So he ended up becoming a volunteer at the King County Sheriff Department. His mission? Find out who the 3 unidentified victims from Gary Ridgway are. And in late 2020, Detective Jensen did just that. He identified the bones that had been found at the baseball field in March of 1984, the first homicide case that he had ever worked. Turns out those bones belonged to Wendy Stevens. Wendy was from Denver, but apparently she had run away when she was just 14 years old.
We find out that Wendy was the youngest victim in the Green River Killer murders. They had been trying to figure out her identity for nearly 30 years.
Detective Jensen says the investigation hasn't ended, though, because they still don't know who the other 2 sets of bones they found belong to.
He goes on to say, as long as they have unidentified victims, their job isn't done.
I went to the King County Sheriff's Office website where they continue to ask for help in identifying the remains of the Green River victims. There's pictures of the victims on the site, and police still need your help in identifying them. There's also an email address and a phone number to call, and I'll put all that in the show notes. So if you have any information on who these unidentified women could be, call, send an email. You never know. Your clue, no matter how big or how small, could be the one that helps these women's families get closure. There's also pictures of missing women who are thought to have been victims of Ridgway. Police are also asking for any information on them to hopefully figure out what happened to them. And before we close out this episode, I want to say it again. These women mattered. They mattered then and they mattered now. Not only to their families, but also the people who worked this case. Wendy Cofield, Maria Malver, Colleen Brockman, Yvonne Antosh, Cheryl Wims, Cynthia Smith, Denise Bush, Andrea Childers, Giselle Lovan, Sandra Gabbert, Martina Otherly, Mary Sue Bello, Delise Plager, Maureen Feeney, Alma Smith, Opal Mills, Tracy Winston, Marcia Chapman, Tammy Lyles, Wendy Stevens, Deborah Bonner, Cynthia Hines, Charmaine Mills, Carol Christensen. These are just some of the victims of Gary Ridgway. And there's more. Many, many more. And with that, I want to close this out. Thanks again for being with us for another week. And we will see you guys again next week.